In June 1629, the merchant ship Batavia struck a reef off the western coast of Australia, carrying 341 souls and the Dutch East India Company's greatest treasure. What began as a maritime disaster would transform into something far more sinister, a descent into madness that would claim more lives than the shipwreck itself, orchestrated by forces darker than the ocean depths. The survivors found themselves marooned on the Houtman Abrolhos Islands, barren specks of coral and sand in an endless sea. Among the wreckage lay not just the remnants of a ship, but the fragments of civilization itself. Here, 300 miles from nowhere, the thin veneer of European society would strip away to reveal humanity's most primal instincts. Over the next 3 months, these islands would witness horrors that would haunt the Dutch East India Company for decades. Mass murder, psychological manipulation, and the birth of Australia's first death cult, all orchestrated by a man whose evil would become legend. This is the story of how corporate ambition and human depravity collided in the most remote corner of the world. The Dutch East India Company was the world's first multinational corporation, wielding power that rivaled nations. In 1629, their flagship Batavia departed Amsterdam, laden with silver, gold, and precious goods worth millions in today's currency. The VOC's reach extended from the Netherlands to the Spice Islands, built on a foundation of ruthless efficiency and unprecedented wealth accumulation. Among the Batavia's passengers was Jeronimus Cornelisz, a bankrupt apothecary fleeing creditors and heresy charges. Tall, charismatic, and consumed by radical religious beliefs, Cornelisz had embraced the teachings of Johannes van Torque, a theology that rejected conventional morality and embraced predestination's darkest implications. He believed the elect could commit any act without sin. The Batavia carried 341 souls across the Indian Ocean, following the Brouwer route that hugged the dangerous Australian coast. Skipper Ariane Jacobs commanded the vessel, but tensions simmered beneath the surface. Cornelisz had already begun weaving his web of influence, targeting vulnerable passengers and crew members who would prove susceptible to his manipulative psychology and radical philosophy. As the ship sailed toward Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, Cornelisz cultivated a following among disaffected passengers and crew. He preached that conventional morality was meaningless, that the elect could transcend ordinary ethical constraints. His message found fertile ground among men facing months at sea, carrying fortunes they would never possess, bound for a colonial world where violence was commonplace. On June 4, 1629, the Batavia struck a reef with devastating force. The ship broke apart on the coral, spilling passengers, crew, and treasure into the churning waters. 40 people drowned immediately, but for the survivors struggling toward the nearby islands, death had only begun its harvest. The real horror would unfold not in the depths, but on dry land. Captain Francisco Pelzert and Skipper Jacobs took the ship's boat to seek rescue, leaving 268 survivors stranded across several islands. They promised to return with help from Batavia, but the journey would take months. In their absence, Cornelisz emerged as a leader among the castaways, his charisma masking intentions that would soon reveal themselves in horrific clarity. Water was scarce, food limited, and tensions rising among the survivors. Cornelisz recognized the opportunity in desperation. He began organizing his followers, identifying threats to his emerging authority. Frederick Pelzert's loyal men, families with children, anyone who might oppose his vision of a new social order, all became targets for elimination in his twisted interpretation of divine predestination. The murders began slowly, disguised as accidents or necessity. A sick child quietly dispatched, a loyal crew member who disappeared during the night. Cornelisz convinced his followers that killing the weak served God's plan, that their actions were predetermined by divine will. Each death emboldened the killers. eroding the last restraints of civilized behavior in this remote corner of the world. Wiebbe Hayes, a soldier assigned to nearby West Wallaby Island with 45 men, remained unaware of the systematic slaughter occurring just miles away. His group focused on survival, finding water, catching fish, maintaining discipline. They represented the last bastion of order and humanity, though they didn't yet realize they were marked for death by Cornelisz's expanding cult. As weeks passed, Cornelisz's followers murdered entire families, including women and children. The killers adopted red clothing as their uniform, marking themselves as the elect chosen for salvation. They developed increasingly brutal methods, sometimes forcing victims to choose how they would die. The small islands became an archipelago of terror where predators hunted their own species. The psychological manipulation reached deeper levels as Cornelisz instituted a reign of terror. Survivors were forced to participate in murders to prove loyalty, binding them through complicity. Those who refused were killed immediately. The death toll climbed past 100 as the cult consumed its own, leaving behind scenes that would horrify even hardened colonial officials. Cornelisz finally turned his attention to Hayes and the soldiers on West Wallaby Island. He sent armed men to eliminate this final threat to his authority, but the soldiers were prepared. Led by Hayes, they had fashioned weapons from salvaged materials and established defensive positions. The two groups of survivors were now at war, predator against protector in this desolate realm. The battle between Hayes's defenders and Cornelisz's murderers raged across the reef system. Using superior tactics and desperate courage, the soldiers repelled multiple attacks. They constructed a stone fortress, maintained watch schedules, and prepared for a siege. Their resistance prevented the complete annihilation of the survivors, though they couldn't yet comprehend the full scale of the massacre occurring elsewhere. On September 17, 1629, Captain Pelzert returned with the rescue ship Sardam, expecting to find survivors grateful for deliverance. Instead, he discovered a scene of unimaginable horror, bodies scattered across multiple islands, evidence of systematic murder, and Cornelisz still attempting to maintain control over his diminished cult. The rescue had arrived, but justice would prove more complex than salvation. Pelzert immediately established a court of inquiry, interrogating survivors and uncovering the full scope of the atrocities. Cornelisz and his followers had murdered at least 125 people, including entire families. The evidence was overwhelming. Mass graves, witness testimony, and the killer's own confessions extracted through interrogation. Justice would be swift and decisive in this remote corner of the world. On October 2nd, 1629, Cornelisz and 6 of his lieutenants became the first Europeans executed on Australian soil. Their deaths marked the end of 3 months of terror that had claimed more lives than the original shipwreck. The hangings were conducted with formal ceremony, establishing legal precedent in a land that had never witnessed European justice. The final toll was staggering: 125 murdered men, women, and children, victims of humanity's capacity for organized evil. Pelzert ordered proper burials for the dead and documented every detail for the Dutch East India Company. The Batavia tragedy had become more than shipwreck. It was a case study in how quickly civilization could collapse when moral constraints were deliberately abandoned. The surviving victims were transported to Batavia, carrying trauma that would last generations. 2 mutineers were marooned on the Australian mainland as punishment, becoming among the first Europeans to live permanently on the continent. Their fate remains unknown, but their presence marked an unintended beginning of European settlement in this vast, uncharted land. The Dutch East India Company suppressed details of the massacre for decades, fearing damage to their reputation and stock price. Internal documents revealed the corporate concern was not with justice or victim compensation, but with maintaining investor confidence. The Batavia tragedy exposed how corporate interests could prioritize profit over human life. a lesson that resonates through centuries of business history. Archaeological investigations beginning in the 1960s uncovered physical evidence of the massacre: mass graves, weapons, personal effects of the victims. The Houtman Abrolhos Islands surrendered their secrets slowly, confirming the historical accounts and adding material reality to what seemed almost too horrific to believe. The bones testified to humanity's capacity for both evil and heroic resistance. Today, the Houtman Abrolhos remain largely unchanged. Coral gardens in azure waters, home to seabirds and marine life. The beauty masks one of history's most chilling episodes, a reminder that evil can flourish anywhere humans carry their ambitions and fears. In this remote paradise, corporate power, religious extremism, and moral collapse combined to create Australia's first recorded mass murder, lessons that echo across the centuries.